What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 14 of Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Michelle Margaux, and joining us today are MLB's Sarah Langs and New York Daily News' Abbey Mastracco. We're going to talk all things Mets over the next half hour, and we will take some fan questions live as they come in, so put them in the chat wherever you are watching. But first, welcome to the show, Sarah and Abby.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, yeah, awesome.
First timers. So we're going to start the show with some news to celebrate. The Mets announced this morning that they are retiring not one, but two numbers next season. Doc Gooden's number 16 and Darryl Strawberry's number 18, making them the 9th and 10th numbers retired by the organization. So, Abby, what was your initial reaction to the news?
It's about time. These guys mean so much to the organization. They mean so much to the fan base, not just what they've done on the field, but also how they've given back to the Mets and given back to the community over the years. And it's great to see. You know, I watched Keith Hernandez's video on Twitter, and everyone seems really happy for these two guys. And I think that they've been waiting a long time for this, and it's well deserved.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's so great to see the Mets really embracing their history over these last few years. I mean, this is a team that for so long had Tom Seaver, Casey Stengel, Jackie Robinson. That was it up there. And, you know, in the outfield with the retired numbers. And now the area is getting so crowded. And I think that's a good team, the good thing. And that's a sign of a team that's proud of what it's done, who they've been, and who they're going to be in the future. So I was really glad to see this.
Absolutely. And before we get into this current team, let's talk about last off day. We start all of our shows like this. We talk about which players did what on their last off day. So Omar Narvaez spent his off day with his son at an amusement park. Edwin Diaz put his son in the driver's seat of his Lamborghini, which I assume was not in gear. And then Jose Quintana went to the Museum of Ice Cream with his family. So which off day sounds nicest to you, Abby?
I'm going to go with the amusement park. It's not something that I like to do a ton anymore, but I have gone with my nieces a couple times in recent years, and it's fun to go with kids. And one of the nieces is getting to the point where she wants to go on bigger and bigger roller coasters. So that's been fun. I'm going to go with Omar Narvaez's off day.
All right. What about you, Sarah?
I have to go with the ice cream. Museum of Ice Cream sounds so much fun, sounds delicious, perfect with the weather we've been having, hot everywhere, especially in Atlanta and now here. So I got to go ice cream.
I have to say, I went to the Museum of Ice Cream in San Francisco about 5 years ago, and I was a little disappointed. I felt like I should have gotten more ice cream out of it. Like I felt like every room should have given me a different flavor of ice cream, and it didn't. So a little anticlimactic on that front. But where we stand today, the Mets have played 14 games since the last off day. They went 7-7 during that stretch. They're now 7.5 games back of the National League wild card. So Abby, what is one positive that you can pull out of the Mets' most recent series against the Braves?
Resiliency. They didn't back down. They didn't roll over against a really tough team that they have not played well against at all this season. And I think that that's been sort of a struggle for the Mets mentally when the Braves are just piling the runs on at certain points this season. And it feels like absolutely nothing is going right for the Mets. They still got up there and they battled. They really did throughout the series. That one win in the first game was pretty good for them. And it shows that they're still trying to uphold a certain standard of play throughout the rest of the season, even though things didn't go their way and they were sellers at the trade deadline. They're still trying to be competitive and show baseball that they are not going to back down. And I think that's exactly what they showed against the Braves.
Sarah, what do you think?
I totally agree with all of that, and I'll really zero in on that first win. I mean, getting home runs, not just from Francisco Lindor, who has been so hot lately, but DJ Stewart, who has also been on one in a really good way, and from Rafael Ortega, his first home run in a Mets uniform. It felt like that first one was a lot of maybe frustration or what have you from this season, and maybe the last 2 years kind of coming out in the offensive way, in a really good way for the Mets. So I think that was a really good game for them. And that's one you can hang your hat on, doing that against the best team in baseball.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about DJ Stewart and Lindor later in the show, but focusing on the Braves right now in particular, the Mets went 3-10 in their season series against them, and Lindor, in reaction to that, said, quote, "They played better than us every time we played them. They played better than we did." So what about the Braves makes them so effective, Abby?
The roster is constructed very well, and the lineup is full of guys who can beat you in 100 different ways. Almost every single hitter in that lineup is a home run threat. You cannot make any mistakes against that lineup. That makes it extremely difficult for pitchers up there, especially guys like McNeil and Peterson, who have pitched against them this year, who have made plenty of mistakes, and they've talked about being a little bit too perfect on the mound. You want to be really perfect against a lineup like this, because every mistake, it's not just that they make you pay in a small way, it's that every mistake they make you pay in such a big way. It's like a game-changing, one mistake can be so game-changing, and that's so much pressure. So it's a really, really dangerous lineup. I mean, this is a historically good offense. They can beat you in so many ways, but it's really the home run power that they have in hitters 1 through 8, even 9 sometimes. It's just incredible to see.
Yeah, there really are no holes in their lineup whatsoever. But Sarah, you are the stat queen. So what is the stat about the Braves that has absolutely blown your mind this season?
Oh my gosh. I mean, as Abby was saying, they're relentless. I think of the song from Hamilton, Nonstop. That is them 1 through 9. That is what they do. And there's so many numbers to pull that out. Obviously, the home run pace are on pace to break the record. 307 home runs by the 2019 Twins, but for me, it starts in the first inning. Obviously, for everyone it does, but for them, it starts in a huge way. They have the most runs, most hits, best run differential of any team this season in the first inning, and we've seen that from the Mets, and in the opposite, we've seen it against the Mets as well from the Braves. So I just think that really explains how they're relentless from that first pitch.
Definitely. And we actually have a fan question, pretty early for a fan question. Very exciting. Rob from YouTube says, who's the next number to be retired? He's talking about going back to Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. Sorry, I was like, who's number?
I think it's probably, number 5. I think it's probably going to be David Wright.
Yeah.
He, again, another player who has meant so much to the organization and gives back to the organization. And he was such a tremendous captain. I only got to be around David Wright in his sort of final non-competitive playing days, but even just seeing the impact that he had in the clubhouse every time he was in there, the way that people respected him, the leadership qualities that he brought, that's just as important in some ways as what he did on the field. And he was one of the most prolific hitters that the Mets developed of his time. And he's such a tremendous player on and off the field, and he's still giving back to the organization. I think that's one that the fans would really rally around, and a ceremony that the fans would really enjoy. And no one is more deserving of the honor than David Wright.
Sarah,
I'll throw out one other name. I'm thinking of eras in Mets history. So the 80s are pretty covered, and David Wright certainly gets us into the mid-2000s. I wonder if there's someone from those early 2000s. And the name that comes to me is John Franco, for what he meant, not just to the team, but as a New Yorker and all of that. So maybe he might come up as well. But I was going to say David Wright before Abby said it. So.
I mean, David Wright is a given. I feel like it's a non-negotiable at some point, which it's a matter of when. So let's go to the Mets core 4, the big 4 offensive threats: Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil, Brandon Nimmo. So right now they have all seemingly turned a corner in August. Nimmo's hitting over 300 in August with a 900 OPS. So Abby, what has impressed you the most about Nimmo?
Can I say his defense, even though that's not what he's doing at the plate? So it was actually Terry Collins a few years ago who told me that sometimes when one area of a guy's game is really clicking and they're really excelling, that can then sort of like spread into another area of their game where they do really well. And Brandon Nimmo's defense has just been incredible this year. And he's made some mistakes in the outfield, taken a lot of accountability, but then if he's able to shake off those mistakes and go to the plate and do what he's doing, it doesn't bother him. He is choosing his spots. He's really maybe not revamped his conditioning routine this year, but he is working with the trainers a lot on how to better maximize his energy and his capabilities. he's always seen the ball well. I mean, Brandon Nimmo has such a tremendous eye for pitching, as is evidenced by that on base percentage and all those walks. But I think what Nimmo is doing on both sides of the ball, he's become just such a complete ball player. And when one area of his game is going, the other area of his game is going as well. And the Mets are better for it.
Sarah, Lindor is also in the midst of a nice stretch here. 10-game hitting streak where he's hitting 400 with a home run and 8 RBI. What do you think of his August so far? You mentioned him earlier.
Well, it's amazing. It goes back so much further than this. There was that great graphic on the post-game show 2 nights ago about how since his second daughter was born, on the eve of Father's Day, he's been on a tear. I believe it's like a 900-ish OPS after having a 700 or so OPS prior to that. And I saw his wife Katya even post that on her Instagram story with the baby in the background. So I love that, but I think it's almost the flip side of what Abby was talking about. This is a guy who comes out and gives 110% on defense every single day. Even when Francisco Lindor is in the slump, we know he's showing up on run prevention. And it's just great to see that now he's turned the tide there as well. He is a really good hitter. It's just so good for Mets fans to be able to see that over a long stretch of time now.
Moving on to the third guy of that core four we were talking about, Pete Alonso, 9 home runs, 20 RBIs this month. What has been different for him, Abby?
That's a good question. What a strange season it's been for him. Started off so hot in the MVP conversation, and then he hit a major slump. He said it was the worst of his career. I wonder if maybe when he was hit on the wrist with a pitch in Atlanta, and the Mets brought him back what we thought was maybe a little sooner than they had anticipated. I wonder if maybe there was still some lingering soreness in his wrist that now is gone, and it's letting him swing freely and get back to the Pete that we've always known him to be. And it's been such a difficult year for him between the trade deadline speculation and the injury and just that slump that he was in. He's done a really good job of shaking it off and working through it. And he's one of the guys who, like I said earlier, they're really trying to uphold a standard of play throughout the rest of the season. And he's an important part of that. And he's talked about how he's not going to back down, and it's important for them to continue winning, even if they're out of the playoff race. And I think we're seeing the Pete that we have come to know and love, and the Pete that we've all come to appreciate. I'm not entirely sure what's different with him. The only thing I can maybe think of is the wrist.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the go-to. Sarah, there's a report recently saying that the Brewers and the Mets engaged in trade talks right before the trade deadline that involved trading Pete Alonso to the Brewers. There's also reports saying that was very strategic on the Brewers' end, or that it was calculated, and no one knows really what exactly was the case at the time. But we have a fan question from Daniel on YouTube that says, "I'll be sad as a Mets fan if Pete Alonso is not a Met for life. Why have the Mets not re-signed Pete Alonso to a contract extension? How likely do you think that is in the offseason versus potentially trading him away?"
I mean, first and foremost, the trade conversations are something that every team has, certainly around that time, around July every year. And I think that I don't want any fans to think that it was atypical, right? Even though the report was very specific, it is interesting to think about the first prospect who was rumored in there, Jackson Chourio. But overall, these are things that happen. But into your question, I mean, I think this is the offseason where we really find out what Pete's future is in New York, even though we may not have a definitive answer. Whether or not he gets extended tells you what may happen next July, next August, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, you're totally right. Also, shout out to Pete being named the MLB Players Trust Most Valuable Philanthropist for July 2023. We love to see it. All right, so last but certainly not least, the fourth guy of that core four, Jeff McNeil. So he's hitting 300 with 3 home runs in August. What have you noticed recently about Jeff, Abby?
Jeff's such a fun one. I've known him since he was in college. Shout out Long Beach State Dirtbags. Jeff is so hard on himself. And I've talked to guys from college that he played at Long Beach with. I've talked to Buck Showalter about this, and people have worried that maybe Jeff is too hard on himself. I've talked to Jeff about this, and he says that's actually what drives him is is keeping the pressure on himself to perform. And I think what we're seeing is the same Jeff that we've always seen. He's relentless at the plate. I think there was maybe the shift restrictions affected him a little bit. I talked to the hitting coaches about this a little bit a few weeks ago, and Jeff's been sort of hesitant to say definitively one way or the other. He's now had enough of a season to be able to figure out how to hit within or past those shift restrictions. I think we thought that, Jeff's always been able to use all fields. He can put the ball wherever he wants to put it. I don't think we thought that the shift restrictions would affect him the way that it has, but there has been some analytics to back that up. And I think now Jeff has made the right adjustments, and he's kept this pressure on himself that he's always going to keep on himself. And we're seeing the Jeff McNeil, I guess, a lot of these guys are just sort of regressing to the mean. They had a really tough first half of the season. Now we're seeing the players that they've always been. And Buck Showalter always says players are going to seek their levels. Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil, they're all now playing to the level that we have become accustomed to with them. So those slumps that we saw, now we know that those were just sort of aberrations. That's not who they were. This is who those guys are, and this is who Jeff McNeil is.
Yeah, Jeff is not someone that I ever worry about. I know people had these high expectations for him. Because of the pressure that he puts on himself, he's not going to let himself fail. Now, he might have to figure some things out to get back to that level, and which everyone would have to do, but I'm not worried about him at all. Before we move off of this core, we do have a fan question from Nancy on YouTube. Sarah, do you think Brandon Nimmo should be considered for captain?
Wow, that's fascinating. I was just talking the other day about how we really don't see that many captains these days. Obviously, Aaron Judge was named captain when he signed his big deal, and Salvador Perez, after being in Kansas City forever, was finally named captain the other day in spring training. So it does feel like teams don't necessarily look for that the way they used to in prior eras, but I do think with his long-term deal and what he brings to the team on and off the field, who he is, his mentality, how he brings himself to the ballpark every day, they would certainly be a really good choice.
Yeah, I definitely think captains kind of get named themselves. Like it's not something that's a debate, really. And I actually had done a private dinner Q&A with David Wright a couple weeks ago, and he said something that I thought was so interesting about being the captain is also separating the manager from the players. So if someone needs to be called out, it's not just, who's the most liked or who, it's who's the most respected, who's going to be able to be the leader when there needs to be one. And so that's a very interesting question. But let's go back to the future, because the future is so bright, especially after this most recent trade deadline. We're going to give each of you a guy in AAA and in AA, and you guys are going to give us one word and why to explain what they can eventually bring to this organization. So we'll start in Syracuse. Abby, Ronnie Mauricio.
Power. He's going to bring a power bat. It's a tough position that he's playing. We'll see how if he ends up going to second base or if he ends up in left field long-term, with Francisco Lindor obviously signed long-term at shortstop. I think Mauricio is going to bring a much-needed power bat. Like we talked about with the Atlanta Braves, they have power up and down that lineup. The Mets have some scrappy guys up and down the lineup. They don't have quite as much power as a team like Atlanta, and the Braves aren't going away. If the Mets are going to contend with the Braves long-term, they need guys like Mauricio who are going to bring more home run power, more warning track power. I think they should maybe call it Mauricio in September and see what he's got. But I know that maybe the Mets don't quite agree. I think that he's going to be a really powerful piece of the future.
We'll find out in about a week. Sarah, Mike Vassell.
How about reliability? Just the idea of a guy who has been really reliable as a starter down in Syracuse. We have seen what he's done, especially lately. And this isn't one word, but seeing the Mets bring up a guy who they've developed, who is coming from their AAA, and not bring in a free agent pitcher, but bring in someone from their minor leagues, is something that we haven't seen. I mean, David Peterson and Tyler McGill, but we haven't seen a bit. And so it'll be very exciting to see a guy who has been in the Mets organization for a bit, starting for them whenever that is that he is doing so.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what he'll do at the big league level if and when he gets called up. So now we're going to transition to Binghamton. Abby, Luis Angel Acuna, new acquisition.
He's a franchise cornerstone. I guess that's, more than one word. Let's just say cornerstone. He's a guy that the Mets can build around. If he profiles similarly to his brother, if he's anything even like a fraction of the amount of his brother, the Mets are going to have somebody who can give the Braves and the rest of the league a lot of problems between the infield defense and the on-base abilities and what he can do at the plate. He is somebody that the Mets are going to build around, and he's the future. It's going to be really exciting to watch him develop over the next couple years.
10 stolen bases in August. That is just absurd. And you see what his brother's doing right now. I think he has like 58, maybe 59 now. Who knows on the season. What about Drew Gilbert, Sarah?
I'll go with explosiveness because everything I've read about him and heard about him talks about how dynamic of a player he is in the outfield. You see his stats in terms of hitting. We know he's a guy who can also hit for power, but he is a guy who really seems to bring another level, whether it's his personality, intangibles, what have you. He is a guy who people know not just for his play, but for being Drew Gilbert. So I'm really excited to see that at the major league level, whenever that may be.
All right, so the big news overnight, which was Shohei Ohtani. Apparently he has a tear in his UCL, which is such a bummer because, he was on the trade block. The Angels decided to take him off the trade block, so he was not traded. He's going to be a free agent. This certainly will affect his market, I would imagine, as a free agent. I don't know how much, but it definitely will. What do you think, Abby?
It's going to affect the market. There's going to be questions of whether or not he can pitch again. Part of the reason that he chose the Angels 6 years ago was that they were going to allow him to be this two-way superstar. They were going to allow him to be him. There were a lot of questions of his long-term durability. And those questions I think we've seen are valid because what he does, it's so difficult on his body. It's so difficult on his arm, and especially the way he plays. He gives 1,000% in every at bat and every outing. He's so fun to watch, and it's so disappointing that, I'm disappointed personally that I don't get to watch him this season. As far as affecting his market, I think teams are going to have to make the determination of whether or not he can still pitch. Now, for the Mets, maybe that's a good thing. If the Mets want to go after him, that kind of fits with the timeline. He's not going to be able to pitch again until 2025, 2020. That's when the Mets are going to start loading up to try and contend again. Next year, they're going to be competitive, as Billy Epler and Steve Cohen continue to stress. But if their window of contention is 2024 or 2025, they may finally get a fully healthy Shohei. But at that point, what can they expect from him? Are they still going to let him be a two-way player? It's going to be really fascinating to see what happens this winter. And I think part of the puzzle is, what does he want? Where does he want to go? What does he want in a situation? Does he still want to be a two-way player? Is he still capable of it after 2 Tommy Johns? So there's so many questions that I don't know that we really haven't. We've never seen a market quite like this.
No, especially as a two-way player. There are guys that have come back from 2 Tommy Johns. Nathan Eovaldi is one, and we see the kind of season that he's had so far. So it is possible. It's just a matter of, how's it going to affect his hitting as well. So we have a lot of comments coming in about how exciting it would be to put Pete Alonso and Shohei Ohtani in the same lineup. Do you think that this is a legit possibility, Sarah?
I have no idea what the Mets are thinking. And I do wonder, to Abby's point, if what they were thinking a day ago may be different from what they're thinking right now. But I will say, to the point of everyone asking, even if he can't pitch or even if he can't pitch for a year, this is a genuine power bat. He hit a home run 115.7 miles an hour yesterday in that game where he unfortunately came out with the injured arm. And then the second game, he had a double as well. So he is a guy who is going to be hitting crushing home runs, and that would be really good for the Mets. They've been lacking for that kind of power duo for a while, and he could be really, really intriguing there, again, regardless of the pitching side.
So Santa Cruz 008 from YouTube said, will the Mets pursue the big free agents this offseason? Abby, I think, we heard Steve Cohen's comments in Kansas City about how he's not going to put a team out there that embarrasses him. What do you think of all of this? I mean, obviously they're going to pursue free agents because of that statement, but they're also, they don't want to set the precedent that they did this last offseason.
Well, first of all, Santa Cruz 008, I was born in Santa Cruz, so appreciate the handle there. I think that they are going to be more strategic instead of just going after the obvious big fish like they did last year with Verlander. They're going to bring in some guys that are going to be more supplementary pieces. The only one that I think might not be like a supplementary piece that or a complementary piece that I think they may have some interest in or do some due diligence on is Julio Urias. He's young. They do need some pitching. They need starting pitching. I think maybe he's a name to watch. I just don't think they're going to be spending a ton of money like they did last year. I think that the goal next year is going to be maybe like 85, 90 wins. Now, with that said, they still need to fill out their starting pitching rotation because Tyler McGill, David Peterson, Kodai Senga, you don't know what you can get from 2/3 of that. Jose Quintana's coming back. He's been pretty reliable, but as I think the biggest lesson the Mets learned this year is that you can never have too much starting pitching depth. So I think they'll be active in starting pitching. They're going to need a little bit more power in the lineup. Shohei would fit that bill, of course. I'm not sure. I think it's just going to be more of some role players. I don't think they're going to go after all of the obvious big targets. The last few years, it's felt like the biggest guys on the market, it was almost inevitable that the Mets, they were either going to go to the Mets or the Mets were going to talk to them, make a competitive offer. And it's going to be a little bit calmer of a winter, but I don't think they're going to, I don't think that precludes them from doing anything big with some of especially the bigger starting pitching names.
Sarah, what's your answer to that question?
I mean, I think it's similar, just reading the tea leaves and everything that we've heard, but I don't think that fans should be disappointed at the idea of role players or, maybe not the absolute biggest target. I mean, look at what Cody Bellinger is doing for the Cubs this year. He was a guy who nobody really was going to take a big chance on. He had such a downturn going back to his MVP season, and since then with the Dodgers, and he has turned into a, borderline MVP candidate in another sort of era type of guy. He has been really, really good. I trust that the Mets front office or analytics folks can find for the next Cody Bellinger, who is the next guy who has maybe been given up on by a few teams, who they can transform and turn into a really, really good player moving forward.
Yeah, Cody Bellinger's totally gotten his career back on track. It's almost as if the Mets had made that kind of move, people would have been upset based on his last couple of years. But then you see what he's able to do now. It really is so impressive. One guy that we haven't really talked about at all is Francisco Alvarez. He's in a bit of a cold stretch in August. He has not hit a home run since August 1st. So, Abby, do you see something different these last few weeks from Alvarez that he wasn't doing earlier?
No. Francisco Alvarez is the same guy every day. I think he's a rookie, and rookies are prone to slumps. He's got to be able to adjust to the adjustments that pitchers are making against him. I talked to Brett Beatty about this a few months ago before he was sent back to AAA. He noticed a lot more changeups being thrown to him and Francisco Alvarez, and they were both trying to figure out how to react better to those changeups, recognize those changeups a little bit better, and in what situations they were being thrown to them in. So this is it's a rookie learning curve, and he set such a high standard this year that we've almost come to expect that he's just not going to cool off ever. At one point, it seemed like he probably wouldn't. I mean, back in June and July, what he's done this year is so remarkable, but he's young and he's learning. He hasn't played this deep into a season before until last year. And he's just a rookie. They're not going to hit the cover off the ball every single game. They've got a lot of adjustments that they need to learn to make. And so far he's done well. And now he's got a few more thrown at him that he's going to have to learn to deal with.
Well, with all that said, Sarah, do you think that he still has a shot at Johnny Bench's rookie catcher home run record?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that number is 26, so he's a few away, but we've seen him go on tears. We've seen him have multi-homer games. I believe he's tied for the second most multi-homer games for any Met before turning 22, and he's done all in the one season. So there's no question he can go on a tear, and I agree with Happy. This is what happens when you get to the majors. And the way we find out who a player is how he reacts when these things happen. It's an ebb and flow, and I'm fully confident that because he is that same guy every day, he will figure it out and he'll be back to being that power threat that he was earlier in the year.
Well, looking ahead, the Mets host the Angels this weekend. It's Mike Trout's first time at Citi Field since 2017. And then they host the Texas Rangers for 3 games where they will avoid facing Max Scherzer. Abby, do you think the Mets are going to call anyone up before their next off day?
Yeah, I think they're going to continue shuffling bullpen arms in and out. As far as like a big call up like a Ronnie Mauricio, I don't know, maybe. I'm kind of hoping because it's the end of the season. Let's give the fans something to root for, something for the fans to watch. Ronnie Mauricio coming up and getting a good look at him, the fans getting a good look at him, and also the Mets getting a good look at him in a more competitive environment than AAA. That would be a huge storyline. It would be so fun to watch. But I think they'll probably continue shuttling some bullpen arms in and out to keep the bullpen fresh. And, so far they have been effective in doing that over these last few weeks. It's been very challenging, and it's very challenging for some of these young pitchers, but I think they've handled it pretty well. So I'm hoping they make a big move and, we get some action in the last month of the season, but otherwise it's probably just going to be some bullpen guys. Maybe Brett Beatty. It might be good to see what Beatty can do now that he's had his breather in AAA and he's handled it pretty well. He's been playing very well down there. So maybe Beatty before the next off day.
All right. So Sarah, how do you plan to spend the rest of your off day today?
Well, I know it's an off day for the Mets and it's an off day for SNY, but I watch every game. So it's not an off day for me. My off day is on November 5th, the day after the World Series ends. So I'll be watching. I have in the background the Dodgers Guardians game right now. They're resuming a suspended game. We've got the Yankees at 1. So I'll be watching baseball as always.
And you wouldn't want it any other way.
Exactly.
Abby, what about you? Any exciting plans?
Well, Buck Showalter always says that there's no off days. There are just games or days where you don't play games. So I will be, there's no game today. I will be writing about Doc and Darryl, reaching out to some people for a bigger story about them, reaching out to Jay Horowitz and trying to see who I can track down that wants to talk about those two guys, which shouldn't be hard because everybody loves those guys and everybody loves talking about those guys. So it's not quite an off day, but it's a day where I get to do some due diligence for a fun story.
Well, I don't want to rub salt in anyone's wounds here, but I am off the rest of the day. This was my one and done. I'm going to go up to Saratoga for the first time. I've never been up there, so I'm very excited about that. I know it's a bit of a drive, but that is how I'm spending my off day after this show. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you so much for watching this latest edition of Mets Off Day Live. Congratulations again to Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry, won't forget that name again, on having their numbers retired next season. We'll be back with another episode next Thursday, August 31st at noon.